Okay, so welcome to everybody here online, live, and welcome to anybody who might listen or watch this part 4 of the series, What Makes Our Inner Work Work in the Future. So this part is called Courage, Caution, and Common Sense. And I'm Ora Gavriely, and we're meeting here again for the fourth time. I'd like to remind you that each part has 2 sections. In the first section, I talk about what has made my inner work work, and what I observe makes my students' work work. The second section of each show, at least the way it is now, is for discussion to a certain extent and questions, if there are any. Let's recap very briefly what we had in the previous 3 shows. So far we spoke about the common confusion between real work and fake work. For example, how people very often confuse understanding a concept and actually doing the work. And a good example of this can be it's just one possible example, a woman who understands the importance of taking good care of her inner children, but forgets to actually do it, or doesn't really understand yet how to actually do it. So understanding is valuable, but for the inner child within us, or more correctly, I would say the inner children, it's hardly enough. So that's one difference between actually knowing how to do the work and doing it, and only understanding the idea, which is better than nothing, naturally. We also spoke about the importance of embracing our greatness and celebrating our successes, and also realizing that many things are successes and even victories that we don't acknowledge at all. And whether they are big or small, if we can celebrate our successes and our greatness without becoming inflated and having our ego grow too large and becoming full of ourselves, then it's extremely important. The third thing we already talked about is the huge importance, really, really huge, of not knowing. And this subject is so central to me and has helped me so much in my work that we will probably come back to it again. So today we will talk about courage and how to temper it with caution and common sense, among other things. So if we think about about courage in our life in general and in our inner work, we're talking about many things, really. We're talking about having the courage to change. We're talking about having the courage to heal. For example, healing very often requires us to have the courage to touch painful aspects of ourselves, to touch our inner wounds, to touch inner parts that are suffering, or that are extremely afraid or angry or sad or depressed or whatever. So that also requires courage. Courage also has to do with seeing ourselves as we are, even though we all have faults, we all have dark parts, dark inner selves. we've all done things that we might not be very proud of. And we need to be courageous enough to look at it in order for anything to change. Okay? We also need the courage, to admit our mistakes. Also, just mentioned, the courage not to know. To not know requires a lot of courage, to just put everything we know to the side for a second and just be with what is, or just see what's out there or in here without prior knowledge of or explanations or things like that. Just really cleanly exploring and looking at things. So that also requires courage. We also need courage when we go into the unknown, whatever that is, when we go over our edges, when we go into what can feel like no man's land. And we will talk about it to some extent today regarding how to do it in a wise way. We also need the courage to fall and to fail, and not to make too big a deal of it. Naturally, if we're not willing to accept the possibility of failure or falling, then we probably won't do much. Success, we also need courage to be successful. For many, many people, it's very, very scary to be successful for all sorts of reasons. And finally, for today, although I'm sure the list could go on, we need courage in order to, in a way, die spiritually again and again, like perhaps the phoenix that burns and rises from the ashes again and again, or like you may have heard of the Tibetan sand mandalas that can take days and days of very, very long and arduous work to prepare. And once they're ready, they're just wiped clean and nothing is left but a pile of mixed colored sand. So we have to be willing to go through things that are of that nature in order for our inner work to really work. So let's begin with some obvious examples and things. For example, sometimes we know we need to change a job or to leave a marriage or part with a boyfriend or move to another country or start a project or even begin our inner work. That's also kind of a change, or go to therapy or anything else. And as we all know, these things can be very frightening and demand courage from most of us to a certain degree. And there are two common problems with things like that in our lives, I would say. One very common situation is with people that get stuck, and that, because they're afraid, they don't make the move they need to make. They're asked from within to make in order to continue to live and to grow and to flower and to flourish and to fly away and discover who they really are. They get stuck because they're too afraid. For example, we can see people talking about leaving a marriage or a workplace for years and years and years without actually doing it. And sometimes it feels like a kind of dying, but not of the spiritual kind, but of, just becoming numb or hopeless or dead inside in a way. On the other hand, we have those people that are, in a way, too quick to change, too quick to take a risk or to rush into an adventure without thinking, without planning, and without taking their sensitive or frightened or rigid parts or inner selves into consideration. So this also is a problem for many, many of us. And some people have both, naturally. So in order for the big life changes to work, we need to access our courage, naturally, but also to do things wisely. And what I'm going to suggest is helpful for both types of people, both those that get stuck and those that jump too quickly off the cliff. Now, I want to tell you about one of the times in my life when I was pushed from within to sort of jump off a cliff into the unknown, which was very scary for me. I was in my 30s and I already had a career. I was a graphic designer and I did things that had to do with printing. I had my small business and I was actually quite successful and earned a nice living. Everything seemed pretty good, but after a while, a few years of doing this, I started having this sense and hearing this inner voice saying something like, you're not really doing the most you can do. It's fine, you're successful, you're earning money, you're doing a nice job, but is this really using yourself to the limit? Is this really expressing your abilities to the, you know, to the most? And I knew that it wasn't. But it was extremely terrifying for me to think what I might do if I don't do, if I close my business, for example. And as you can imagine, it's difficult to close something that's successful and you built with your own hands and you have no idea where you're going from there on. But this feeling grew and grew. It took a few years. But in the end, I realized that if I wanted to thrive, to flourish, to live, I really had to take the chance and to go into the unknown. And what I decided to do was I closed my small business with nothing to replace it. And I took a year off. And during this year off, I did two things. I did very, very, very intensive work on myself. And I wrote a lot. And I moved to a new city from Jerusalem to Tel Aviv. Now, I really had no idea what I was going to do. I had no idea that I would be doing things like I'm doing today. And of course, that was very frightening. But I knew I had to do it. It was very clear. So I sat with myself and I did all sorts of things. I made calculations. I figured out how much money I would need in order to not work for a year and where it was going to come from. I figured out, you know, what might be, if nothing happens during this year, what my plan B, C, and E might be. And I decided to trust that within this year, it will be revealed to me what it is that I will do in my life once I stopped being a graphic designer. So of course, this was very frightening in a way, but at the same time, it was also very exciting, but I also was very, very grounded in doing it. I knew what I was doing. I made the calculations. I thought about things. And this has a lot of importance, not only on a practical level, but also on an emotional and even spiritual level. So let's talk about that a little bit. So in order for this to work for me, as I said, I needed the courage to jump into the unknown, and I needed a good enough plan. And the good enough plan helps us to jump into the unknown or to make a big life change without becoming too scared, petrified, or frozen. And also, I made sure that I will be able to support myself through this change, both financially and practically and emotionally. That's just pure common sense. Because if you become too imbalanced, you very easily get into survival mode. And if you get into survival mode, you will probably be surviving and not developing. You know, these are these are generalizations, and there are different stories, of course, but we are dealing in generalizations right here, and everyone has his own life, and there are differences between us and what is right for us to do naturally. So you don't really want to freeze in midair or to find yourself in fight or flight mode. You really need to be able to nurture yourself enough through a process like that and during a transition like that. So that's kind of generally what I recommend, a combination of courage and grounding and planning and emotional nurturing for ourselves. Let's talk a little bit more about the emotional common sense that is so important here. And of course, it's all tied together. For example, we know we all have inner parts, inner selves, sub-personalities, if you like to call it that. So think about it like that. If, for example, you are run by an inner self that is very, very courageous, and you don't hear other parts within yourself that may be warning you, you may be making what we could call a navigational mistake, which will take you off track, okay? A courageous part within us can really want to, jump from the top of a building, and it's not necessarily what is right for us. So the idea is not just being blindly courageous, of course. So we need to be able to listen to many inner voices, of course. If you are identified or run by a frightened child, for example, or an inner self that doesn't like change, you may never move at all. Or the move may be very, very difficult or not succeed. For example, an inner child, and I'll give you an example from my life later in this meeting, an inner child can be so frightened that it will prevent us in succeeding to make the change that we need to make, okay? So in my terms, I think I could say that there is a huge, huge difference between jumping off a cliff when you're run, for example, by a courageous part of yourself or an adventurous inner self, or jumping off the same cliff, same situation, but you're navigating from what I call the aware I. And you take all your inner parts and selves into consideration, you embrace them, you listen to them, and you even consult with them, and you take care of them. And you do all this while not identifying with any of them. And of course, that's something that you need to learn how to do naturally. Now, I've gone through many, many big life changes, both physical and internal. You know, new relationships, changing professions, going into the unknown, all sorts of spiritual deaths in order to be reborn. And it continues to happen to this very day, thank God. You know, it keeps me alive. And I keep discovering new and actually very delightful things, not only delightful, but a lot of them are, that are possible for us as human beings. And it has brought me many, many great rewards, this ability. And one of the main ones was when I was 34, and I was just after what I told you, I took this year off, and within this year, when I wasn't working, I only did my internal work, and I knew I had enough money to not have to worry too much during that year. So I did my careful planning also. So during this year, I received this message from within that I should start talking to people about voice dialogue, which is the first thing that I began to teach way before I was flowering Diamond Way. Okay, so during this year, when I heard this this message, you know, of course, that was again very scary, and it was also a time when I was on the brink of a new relationship. So a lot of new stuff going on together, and me being sort of asked from within to step into a completely new role, teaching something completely new, which I've never taught and never imagined that I would teach ever. And both of these things demanded of me to be much more exposed, amongst other things. And for some inner selves of mine, it wasn't easy very naturally. And then I discovered an inner child that felt awkward and nervous around people. And I'm going to read you a part of this conversation with this inner child that I had more than 20 years ago. And this was one of the things that I did at that time that helped me make the transition into all those new and scary things that I was about to be doing. So I'll read it for you. Of course, I've edited it a little bit because we don't have time for the whole thing. So this is a conversation between me, Ora, when I am in the aware ego, the aware I, and this inner child that I found. Hello, the child says, hi. I'm glad to talk to you again. You were feeling pretty bad lately, weren't you? And the child answered, very bad. It's hard for me when people see me. Why is it hard? He answered, because they see I can't do anything. I'm clumsy. I want to be inside the wall. I don't want people to see me. It hurts. I just want to hide and be safe so they won't see me. That's all. So I asked him, but you wanted me to see you, right? You tried to get my attention. Yes, I want people to see me, but it's hard. How do you feel now? I'm worried and my heart aches. I know you are, my darling. What are you worried about? I asked him. I'm worried that I will make a mess. If people see me, they won't like you. I always make a mess. I don't know what to do. I feel so bad. I always want to hide. I said, I think people like you a lot. Yesterday we talked with Edna. She liked you. He said, she's strange. I said, and I like you, and Jonathan likes you. No, I want to hide, but I can't. I feel stupid. I make a mess. You're not stupid. You're just fine. You don't need to change or do anything. You can just be. We can sit together sometimes and do nothing. Would you like that? Then he said, please hold my hand. So I imagined holding his hand. Is this good? I asked him. Better, he said, but don't touch me too much. I said, okay, why? And he said, it hurts. I'll be careful. I think you feel better now. He said, I have a little house, he said, and I hide inside it. If you want me to come out, you have to knock. I said, okay. And he said, I don't have to open the door. Okay. Only if I want to. Okay. You have to ask me. I said, I see. I didn't ask you enough lately. It became a bit too much for you. Meaning the exposure. And then he said, you have to ask me first. So I answered, I think that's a very good idea. I'll listen more carefully to what you are feeling. And he said, you have to think of me too. Sometimes it's too much. I said, you're right, and I'm sorry. He said, okay. I love you. He answered, okay. And then I wrote, this dialogue has turned out to be revealing. It seems I've been indulging in too much exposure lately, and it's hard on some parts of me. I need to take this child into consideration and allow him to feel safe before I expose too much. I sort of need to respect his privacy and needs a bit more so that he feels comfortable again. Otherwise, if exposure goes too far, too soon, it creates resistance and hypersensitivity instead of openness. So I was surprised to find this. I found it this morning. And this child taught me a very, very important lesson, which I take into consideration since then, with ups and downs naturally, that we really need to take into consideration when we are going forward courageously and wanting to do something. And in any time in our life, we need to take care and to listen to all these parts, both the ones that want to move forward and the ones that are scared of being exposed or of change or whatever that is. And the ones that are opposed to change and to courage are not necessarily only kids, of course. So it's important, really, really important to understand that if you want to do this right, and for the process to be healthy for us, it's best to really understand how to work with opposing inner forces and with the aware I, amongst other things. What I've read to you is naturally only a little bit of extensive work that needs to be done in cases like this. So I hope this was helpful to you. And so far, I've been sharing things. It wasn't planned, but it so happened that I've been sharing mainly things from 20 to 30 years ago, and even earlier than that. But the reason for that, I think, is that I'm sharing now a lot about how I built the foundation, my foundation, that was really a basis for things to come in the future. And for me to be able to do things that I do today that require even more flexibility and courage, and for my spiritual development, I really needed to have this good foundation. And I recommend it to everyone to build it. And some people, you know, just go directly into spiritual development without, at the same time or before that, taking care of the basics. And that's actually not the best way to make our inner work work. When we do build such a good foundation, we can really spread our wings. We can really fly away, because we can allow ourselves to be more courageous. We know ourselves better. We know how to support ourselves. We know how to get support from others. We know how to be connected to spiritual sources of support and teaching and stuff like that. And we know how to blend wisely courage and adventurousness with common sense and with being grounded and being practical and cautious. So thank you very much for joining me. We will meet again in a few seconds for the second part of this show, and then we can discuss things, and you can ask questions if you like. So I'll leave you for a second, and we'll be back immediately.